Hi everyone. This week we're going to be talking about Pokemon because we got several requests to do a video games episode. But most video games we're not a fan of, but this is one that we share a common love of, or we used to.
And I think it's like such a large cultural object. There's a lot of ways to look at it. And it's just kind of a good, like, I don't know. It came up like naturally at work this week. Someone was talking about Halloween, and one of their, like, someone at work, his husband is a teacher, and he's like, oh yeah, we got like 2 Pikachus in the class this year. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, still, like, the Pikachu is 27 years old, I would say, or something, as an idea. And kids are still like instantly connecting with it and being like, oh, that's cute. Like, I want to be that.
And it's good that we didn't do this episode like we intended to a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
We were going to do it, but then we had to re-record the Megalopolis episode because we lost the file. But in the few weeks since, there was what has been dubbed the teraleak, where a terabyte of information leaked from Game Freak servers. Yeah. And there's a huge amount of content that we can use to support our ideas because we want to talk about fandom and nostalgia, and Pokemon is a very good case study for both of those things.
No, that leak is wild. The biggest, like, the most public item of it is these weird kind of tracts from it, I guess, these chunks of text that are like lore. And so there's one that involves human relations with a Typhlosion. And so, but once you get past that, there is like a lot to it. I think also like a lot of like key business information leaked as well, like people's like pay stubs and stuff. So it's like, it's a big net of stuff. We're not going to be discussing Game Freak employees' pay stubs though, however.
Yeah, I mean, I was mostly interested in all of the unused Pokemon designs. That
the cutting room floor. Yeah. I think you saw some gems in there. I guess once you already know these designs and what the final ones look like, then everything else just seems uncanny. Like, there's just something off. I'm like, that color is wrong. That shouldn't be there. Like, it just seems like a test. But no, it's cool to see like into their mind of how they shop these things.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't as jazzed about these leaks because like previous leaks happened of Generation 1 and Generation 2, which I'm more excited about, or I was. Yeah. These were cool to see though, and there's a lot to talk about with this week's episode.
So yeah, and then I guess both of our like personal exposures to Pokemon, I mean, we were just children in the early 2000s. It'd be hard not to be into it, you know? Yeah. Like, it just caught so many kids. Like, even if you were a kid who like somehow, I don't know, wasn't into Japanese things, you'd be into Pokemon. If you were into games, you'd still probably play a Pokemon game. Like, it's just, very few kids weren't swept up by it. I mean, tons of kids didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh! You know? I think that was much more like boy-coded for one thing.
I mean, I got too into Pokemon as a kid, so then by the time Yu-Gi-Oh! Came out, I wasn't allowed to like it. I wasn't allowed to have the cards or watch the show. Someone had gifted me a Yu-Gi-Oh! Shirt, but I always felt like my parents were going to get mad at me for wearing it.
I have this memory, and I wonder if someone else can confirm this, but I, unsolicited, received a VHS of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pilot in the mail.
Really?
Yeah. I swear, my parents were like, why is this here? And I don't know what this campaign was, like, if I am remembering this correctly. Were they just like finding, like, through data analysis, the most susceptible children to this? Like, all right, what homes in Phoenix, Arizona have a boy between the ages of this and is hyperactive? But when like Japanese media for kids invaded in the 80s, from my understanding of it, I should have researched this more, but there was a law kind of against TV merchandising to kids. Like, you couldn't sell things to kids on television basically until the 80s.
Yeah, well, the consumer rights movement happened in the 70s. Yeah. So I think we might have mentioned this maybe on the unions episode, but I talked about the consumer rights movement because when antitrust law stopped being enforced, you might ask yourself, okay, what were boomers doing? They were preoccupied with the consumer rights movement. That was what they thought might be the solution to mitigate the effects of centralized control and concentrated power. They weren't interested in getting rid of concentrated power like, say, a silent generation people were with antitrust law. Instead, they just wanted like to put seatbelts in cars or airbags in cars and things like that. But with kids, they were very hard on that. They really wanted to make sure kids didn't get the same sort of like consumerism that adults were getting on the TV.
It's like cigarettes. It's like, we can have them because we can handle them, but you got to keep them away from kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were like rolled back partially in the 80s and the kind of Reaganite, we shackled the businesses too much and they're unable to grow. And Japan never had that kind of, they have great tightness in a lot of their laws and stuff, but I think they've always seen it as fair game to sell stuff to kids. So when the 80s came around, I don't know what broke in first. I mean, Speed Racer maybe. That's not even my parents knew. Like, oh yeah, Go Speed Racer.
Astro Boy.
Oh,
I feel like that was one of the earliest animes.
Yeah, to cross over into the US as well. But I think this must have been really interesting for parents to like, I don't know, there's always going to be a divide between kids and their parents, what kids are into and what their parents grew up with. But that really became much more apparent with Japanese stuff. Because it's like, I think for these sets of parents and kids, it's like, oh yeah, my son's into cowboys, just like I was, you know, or maybe he's into spacemen now because we've gone to space. Like, I always kind of think of the Toy Story thing of, it's completely forgotten about in the later ones, but the idea is that like Woody is being replaced, you know, in the first movie, like by, like kids don't want cowboys anymore. That's old. Kids want like sci-fi, space stuff. And so there's always been that kind of natural churning of kids' tastes. But then just having like Japanese pocket monsters introduced. I think that my mom's impulse to limit this stuff to us was very well meaning, but also just kind of at a point of, I don't understand this. Like, I don't want this messing with my kids' minds. My mom was very sensitive to violence. That's why she didn't like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh. But I heard that tack from other parents too. There was a concern about violence.
Yeah.
They do fight, you know, like that is the idea of it. I don't really know how they picked up on that.
But I feel like the fighting was always so cartoonish. Yeah. There wasn't blood. Like Pikachu didn't get bruised up. No. Or no, actually he kind of would in a way.
They do that one like anime thing where they just kind of put scratches on them basically. They put like a crosshatch, like a tic-tac-toe thing on them. And like, this means Pikachu has been injured.
Yeah. And they're like sort of passed out on the ground with a little mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Unrelated, but my mom didn't like Bionicles because she said they looked like skeletons.
Oh, I can see that.
But my mom was okay with Pokemon, I guess, when it came out. She didn't realize we'd get as addicted to it as we did. Yeah, I do remember getting really amped up, having fights with my brother about Pokemon cards and things like that.
Oh, yeah, no. There's definitely like it does seem to hijack the child's brain. Like it's too potent. Like I don't know if we should be trusted with it. But yeah, my mom's like attempts against this kind of fell apart when I was gifted from my older cousin his Game Boy Color when he got a Game Boy Advance. And then like, I think the family rule of like, you can't turn down a gift supersedes her kind of like anti-violence efforts and stuff. So with that, it's like, all right, well, why can't I have the cards? And then now I have the cards. Like, well, now I can watch the show too. And so like that kind of like broke open the floodgates.
In my family, we weren't allowed to have consoles. Like, I really wanted to have a Nintendo 64 so I could play Pokemon Stadium, to the point where as a kid I tried to run away from home because I wanted to go to my friend's house who had Pokemon Stadium, and my mom let me get halfway down the block with like a laundry basket full of clothes. And it was actually very traumatic for my younger sister to watch. But yeah, we could have Game Boys, and the only game that ever really like appealed to me was Pokemon. So I played it quite a lot as a kid. Mm-hmm. But I think both of us recognized, like, yes, we played Pokemon Red and Blue, but it wasn't actually until Ruby and Sapphire that I can like really remember what the game was like.
Yeah, no, I was probably a little too young for Blue. And then also it's just not an intuitive game at all. Like it is so like shackled by the constraints of its technology. And it was just kind of like, I remember first opening it up and just trying to understand walking through the world. I remember like I'd have to just tap in my cousin to like, how do I get to the next area? Like what's going on here? I remember like how you hop down from those ledges and you can't go up them. That was breaking my small little brain at that time. I was just like, all right, like, so there's no jump button. There's no jump button at all.
Yeah. So maybe now's a good point to start to talk about the origins of Pokemon.
Yeah. So what we know as like Red and Blue in the US, like there's kind of a generation 1, as that's called.
Yes.
There is kind of a earlier than that generation, half generation, which is that Japan got a release of Red and Green version, as they were called over there. And that's actually like a cultural difference I learned about in something, which is that in Japan, they see red and green as the opposite colors. But in America, we see red and blue as opposite colors when it comes to teams.
Yeah. I mean, red and green are opposite colors, like in the color spectrum.
Yeah, so like, the Japanese are a little more correct on that. But it's like, and of course, like in America, like stoplights, like all this stuff, we do have a red-green dichotomy, but it's always red team versus blue team.
Well, that's the fault of Christmas.
Yeah, I guess we have
Yeah. So yeah, Red and Green, they came out in Japan on December 21st, 1995. And then it wasn't released in the US until September 28th, 1998 as Pokemon Red and Blue.
Which means that we were playing it like very well into their life cycles, basically.
I know. I didn't realize it was released in the US as late as it was, because I think of it as being such a 1990s phenomenon when really it's a like turn of the century or beginning of the new millennium phenomenon.
No, there was like reading about the development of the first generation. Like this was towards the end of so the Game Boy itself was really towards the end, and then the Game Boy Color came out there, but even that was pretty old as well. So it was a very late in the console's life release, and so there was some kind of worrying about that of like, oh, this could be a great title, but it's hamstrung by its console. But I think really great stuff comes out at the end of a console's lifespan. I don't know, there'll be some amazing launch titles, but I think that like by the end of a console, people know what they're working with. And some good stuff comes out.
I mean, artists are famously bad with deadlines. So I imagine that the people who have the most creative visions are then the ones who are like, oh, wait, we have to get this out next year or else we're like, the ship has sailed. So yeah, probably the most ambitious things come last.
Yeah. So yeah. And then the last bit of Generation 1 is Pokemon Yellow version. Did you have a friend who had that? Did you ever play that as a kid? I knew one friend who was like I know about the differences.
Like you could get all the starters and you started out with Pikachu and Pikachu followed you.
Yeah, it was one of the first kind of attempts to like address the disconnect between the video games and the anime as well. Because during this early period of rapid growth, it's just happening in so many different directions. You know, like the games are the first thing that happened, but then the merchandising, of course, shoots off of there. And the anime started developing its own kind of like rules and systems and stories.
Even different Pokemon heights.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, part of the teraleak was there were documents that came out that showed some of the height differences between Pokemon in the games and Pokemon in the anime. Because, for example, Charizard's taller. Other Pokemon like Dunsparce are smaller. So there are key differences in those ways.
Interesting. And Yellow really remedied a lot of the sprite work as well. There was some weird stuff in Generation 1. I just have very clear memories of like how disgusting Golbat looked. And this giant tongue that just never shows up again in the series.
Yeah, I mean, like Coughing had its skull and bones symbol on top of its face or above its face, and like Cloyster was depicted sideways. There were some key differences for sure. But yeah, on Pokemon Red and Blue, I kind of want to talk about the idea behind the games a bit too, because I think that the creators of Pokemon, like Satoshi Tajiri and Junichi Masuda, they had this really great idea of how to approach creating a new game, which was thinking about gamers as a disparate group, separate from just the general population, as people who are lacking certain things. Because they envisioned Pokemon as being this like sort of way to simulate catching bugs and then making them fight, which was something that they experienced as children growing up in Japan, but they thought that urban Japanese children in the 1990s were going to be missing. I found this article from The Guardian titled Pokemon from Bugs to Blockbuster, where they mentioned that on Junichi Masuda specifically, he was obsessed with catching insects in his youth. But on a more interesting note, as a child, he was more of an outdoors type. He grew up in Osaka, Japan, but spent most of his time outside on his bicycle catching insects. I was almost never at home.
It just reminds me so much of my like idyllic childhood growing up in Germany. That was like ages 7 to 10 for me. And I would just bike around with my friends. We'd play with like beetles out in the forest, and I would collect bugs. Kind of creepily, I would put them onto slides for my microscope so that I could look at them. I don't know. I hope that's not part of the dark triad. Is a cruelty to animals and bedwetting and fire setting. I didn't do the other two, but I get does cruelty to invertebrates really count?
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned on the insect aesthetics episode, when you're doing research in universities, you don't have to submit to the ethics board like research prior to doing it on invertebrates. You're allowed to do as many painful things to invertebrates as you want. It's really unfortunate.
There you go. That's my defense. Yeah, I would be a normal child. But I played a lot of Pokemon when I was a kid in Germany. It really brought together like all the kids. We'd have our little link cables and stuff. My mom was involved in the PTA. And I remember they'd be doing their PTA stuff, and then us kids, I remember someone had the 4-way connector thing for the Gen 3 game. So we could do like a double battle. One of those. Yeah. It took a lot of, we were all right there next to each other. Like, don't mess up the cables at all. Like, make sure they don't get unplugged. But yeah, we were actually able to.
So each of you would be controlling one Pokemon in a double battle?
Yes.
Okay.
I have to imagine that was pretty rarely used. Yeah.
I mean, even with my brother, I didn't feel like I ever got to evolve any of the Pokemon that evolved through trading.
Oh, no. Trading was like, I feel like when I was meeting other kids, it'd be like, we'd always like make introductions, be like, all right, let's get to the trading now. Like we would like get into that.
Yeah.
But no, I like, as a kid, I played a lot of Pokemon, but then I also, did real life Pokemon where I'd like go out and stuff. I remember one like summer coming back to my Game Boy SP and it had like a little layer of dust on it. And I was like, wow, I had a really good summer. I was a very good boy. I didn't like play too much video games.
Yeah.
But then in the winter in Germany, it's like, what else are you going to do besides play Pokemon?
Yeah, that's true. But I want to go back though, just to that original idea that Satoshi Tajiri had, because I think I want to draw a comparison between Pokemon and Death Stranding, which is one of the only other video games I can say we both like. Yeah. It's a newer game. But with Death Stranding, Kojima, he had the idea of creating a game based off of how like gamers are insulated and don't have enough social interaction. And he created a new type of video game that included what's called like a social strand system, which is basically like the players in the world of Death Stranding, they're sort of creating a system of devices that help each other traverse the terrain and beat the game. But yeah, I think in both of these cases, just thinking about gamers as being, maybe they don't have enough time in nature, maybe they don't have enough time having social interactions, and then building games based off of that has created some of the best games out there.
Yeah, games that like see a lack of something and try and like fill it as a social good is very admirable. Yeah, I don't know. That's a very interesting thread to draw between those two. Yeah. I remember, in Death Stranding, Kojima just saying that like so much of games is about pushing things apart, and he wanted something that would pull people together. I think it could have been accomplished more with a conventional multiplayer game as opposed to the kind of like chronologically asymmetrical nature of Death Stranding, where you're kind of like seeing things placed by people in the past and all that. But I don't know. I'll never understand Kojima's mind.
I mean, for people who are like chronic gamers, you'd be kind of shocked how they kind of have to interface through the world with the world purely through gaming. Like, have you ever met the type of person where they say they don't like music, but they like music and video games?
I personally know. I think I avoid those people like the plague. But I've seen that.
I don't know them as adults, but like in middle school, I would meet people like that where they'd be like, oh, maybe I like classical and video game music. It was always a very big red flag.
Yeah, that's a cargo shorted opinion. Let me say that is a Legend of Zelda t-shirt type opinion. No, I actually of all my like childhood video game memories, there's not really a lot of music to it. This is kind of a light overshare, but my dad had some pretty strange sleep schedules due to the military. And so we had to be very quiet in the home. Yeah. And so we always had like a headset attached to the TV. If I was going to watch anything, I'd wear a headset. I would never play it loud. I would never play video game music either. And so I didn't really know the music of Pokemon for a while. So all this stuff about like their cries and like, oh, the music on Route 33 is amazing. All this stuff. I'm like, I just kind of have to nod along to it. Like, yeah, I was a very silent child.
I mean, I didn't play the games with audio on very often because back in the day, Game Boys, you would get the power from disposable batteries. You couldn't recharge them. And so you didn't want to waste them. As a little boy, you'd have to go to your parents and be like, oh, I need more batteries again for my Game Boy. Yeah. And imagine how easy it would be for the parents to be like, actually, you're playing it too much.
Yeah, exactly. So you had to like titrate your amount of gaming. Yeah.
Or you also just like didn't want to run out of the batteries. So I didn't play with the sound on very often.
Yeah. That was when I got the Game Boy SP, the rechargeable, blew my mind. So I even had the extended battery pack on that. I had this like aftermarket one, for the truly obsessed child.
Did you have the accessory where it would put like little boom boxes on the sides?
My friends had those. Also one that would magnify the scrm to make it bigger as well. I didn't think it was good either. There was this whole cottage industry of like shitty third-party accessories. There's this place I buy sandwiches from in River North. It's like a whole it's a liquor store. They got sandwiches. It kind of feels New York coded, honestly. But they have just like random shit for sale. And they had like Wii Sports plastic things you clip the Wii controllers into, like a tennis racket and a baseball bat. I'm like, who is buying this in 2009? Like, how untouched are these? Yeah. I don't know. Third-party accessories are always janky.
Very true. So for the next section, I think it might be good to talk about the key moments in the Pokemon timeline, because I can break them down and just say 3 booms and 1 bust. Yeah. And so the first one we've already kind of talked about a bit, which was the late 90s, early 2000s Pokemania craze. And this is specifically when it was like really at fever pitch in the United States around, say, 1998, 1999, that time period. But I think the zenith is truly when the first Pokemon movie came out, because it coincided with the release of the Burger King toys, which I didn't realize. Because I remember my family was obsessed with getting those Pokemon Burger King toys because my family didn't really eat fast food. My parents were wise and knew it was bad for us, but we were getting those.
We made an exception for those. It's such a big get for Burger King. Who's always the bridesmaid and never the bride. It seems they're always the second place to McDonald's, but that was savvy on their part.
Yeah,
getting those.
Did you have a lot of those?
I can't picture these. Yeah, I can't picture those. Wait, no, I would still be in Arizona at that time. But I actually just don't, Pokemon is the most profitable media creation of all time, and largely through merchandising. I think outside of the games, I didn't have too much Pokemon stuff lying around. Action figures, that's not how I interacted with Pokemon. When my friends and I would play Pokemon, we'd be just out in the yard flapping our wings being Charizard, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But no, I think I missed out on those.
Yeah. Burger King, they came out with 57 different Pokemon toys, and they would be distributed along with these little Pokeball keychains that actually got recalled. Did you ever hear about this?
Choking hazard?
Yeah. A girl choked to death on them. And then if you brought in your old Pokeball keychain, they'd give you a free milkshake.
Oh, nice.
So actually, no, I bet Burger King still made money off of this, but it ended up costing them after that a little bit at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just in terms of child safety in Pokemon, what do you know about Electric Soldier Porygon?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. I was at a concert recently where there were red and blue flashing lights, and I was like, isn't this a seizure thing, like the red and blue Porygon?
Yeah. So there's an episode in the anime, it was aired in Japan, and lots of kids reported having seizures to it. But then I've read other stuff that it was kind of a social contagion thing, actually.
No, I don't think so. Because, there were hundreds of little kids that had to go in ambulances to the hospital after experiencing seizures.
I don't know. I should have sourced something on this. But yeah, I was reading stuff that was saying that people couldn't find evidence of this. It might be half urban legend, basically. But the elements are true. Alternating red and blue, that'll get you there when it comes to a seizure. Yeah. But yeah, it just might have been blown up a little bit. But I think that things like that, like a choking hazard and the seizures, as I was saying, this must have been kind of a lot for parents to deal with when this giant cultural force was coming from across the ocean. And then hearing stuff like that is just going to make them even more freaked out, I would say.
I know. And this was in the 90s when there was still a bit of the satanic panic. And that probably was fuel to their fire of thinking that Pokemon was demonic. Because I remember there being some people who thought Pokemon was satanic at the time.
Yeah. No, my Mormon friends and stuff. They were always I don't know. I always felt kind of bad around them because I was allowed to engage in the all the products of the secular world. But a lot of my Mormon friends in Arizona weren't allowed to engage with Harry Potter in any way. Yeah. But I knew one family they could do it secretly, so they would play Harry Potter with us, basically, and not with their friends from Temple.
Yeah. But yeah, during the Pokemania craze, Pokemon was truly everywhere. You could get it on t-shirts, book bags, markers, coloring books, on your ice cream, waffles, even your mac and cheese. That one I actually did try, the Pokemon mac and cheese with the shapes. But it got so big that Pokemon was even kind of seeping into the adult world. One of the covers for Time magazine during the year of, I think 1999, was of a bunch of Pokemon with Poliwhirl in the center. Because low-key, it was actually considered as a potential mascot for a period of time. Pikachu won out, but I'll link in the show notes an interesting video essay about Poliwhirl.
How did they think that a character with no determinable mouth was going to be? I just feel that's such an elemental rule. There's nothing to reference there. It's strange. It's void-like.
Maybe they wanted a Pokemon with a spiral that could hypnotize children.
It's true. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also included in the Norm Macdonald show, he had a Pokemon skit. A weird amount of love went into that.
I remember that when I was a little kid. My
watching the Norm
was
Macdonald show.
Pokemon's on TV. Come here, and I was like, "What is this?"
She's watching the Norm Macdonald show.
Yeah, I thought it was SNL actually, but yeah, I looked it up for this week, and it was Norm Macdonald.
No, I don't know. I'm always so fascinated by whenever a great comedian emerges in the media landscape, and network television's one thing. It's give him a conventional multi-camera sitcom. That's just the way they do to everyone. And I from what I've seen of Norm's show is pretty good, but it just doesn't seem like a natural fit for the format. I'm a John Mulaney defender. Not all of his personal actions, of course, but his stuff is just funny. Yeah. But right after the big success of his first stand-up special, they saddled him with a conventional sitcom that crashed and burned after one season. Yeah. It's just God, keep on doing this.
Yeah. And so as a result of the Pokemania craze, Nintendo actually saw a 250% increase in profits in 1999 compared to the previous year.
That's wild.
That's wild.
It's just, it's throughout this, I kept on forgetting that like Nintendo isn't just Pokemon, because it's all this Pokemon research and stuff. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, they were still releasing Mario games and stuff like that. And Legend of Zelda was selling like crazy. Like there's so much going on there. And then this, I guess the term I've heard used for Game Freak, the developer of Pokemon, is that they're like a second party game developer, where if third party, companies will make games for any console, any company, then a second party is kind of this like semi in-house sort of deal. Like they could theoretically make games for other systems, but they're just kind of kept by Nintendo broadly.
I mean, Nintendo isn't very innovative. I think that most Nintendo fans are like satisfied with all of these remakes, but I feel like even when the studios try to do something that's a little bit new, like what's that one game, the ink one?
Oh, Splatoon.
Yeah. That doesn't really ring as like anything that cool.
No, some people really like it, but yeah, it's increasingly rare for Nintendo to issue a new IP. Yeah. I think they make a big deal out of it every time because they kind of know how rarely it happens. They're like, look, guys, we got a new idea for the first time in a few years. But I think their reticence is actually kind of a good trait in some ways. Like with Breath of the Wild, they got to kind of sit back and watch like Western game developers make worse and worse open world games that were like losing the point of what an open world actually means. And then at the end, they could kind of do it correctly. I think they like to watch others fail and fall into things and fall into fads. Yeah. Not that they're immune to fads or anything. I mean, all of motion controls was Nintendo's fault. So
do you like open world?
Only if it's in how do I say this? Like an unextractable part of the game. Not when it's just like tossed in. Yeah. Or a thing is made open world because it feels like you just should from a marketing angle. Like it's a necessity for competing. Like, no, it has to really be like an important part of the game. So I like Metal Gear Solid 5. I like I like Breath of the Wild. I basically like Japanese open world games. I don't like American ones.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, with me, low key, I don't play Pokemon, although I'm happy to talk about it this week. I did get a PS5 a few years ago. I feel like every time I've mentioned I have a PS5 on our podcast, conveniently, I have to edit it out for some reason. So I don't know if people even know this, but yeah, I tend to like 100-hour plus story games that are like AAA and are very expensive and very well done. Like I like Horizon Forbidden West. I liked Jedi Survivor. I like Death Stranding. Yeah.
I was going to say at the top of the episode, like my newfound, as in the past 2-3 years, skepticism of video games is largely due to their like value time proposition kind of thing of just how much time they take out of you. And it's those type of games that I'm most skeptical of is open world Ubisoft collectathons. I knew a guy in college just played too much of those. I think it just, you got to watch out. It'll find itself into this groove in your brain. It's just like, oh, I got to unlock another tower so that I can get more icons on the map and then go collect the icons. I just think you got to watch out for those. I've also, the other type of game I'm very skeptical of is like the numbers get bigger shooters. Those ones like looter shooters. Like Anthem was the failed one, but
like Power Creep. That's how you say it, right?
Yeah. So these are games where like they're inspired by Diablo originally, where like it's kind of like semi-randomly. The stats for like Borderlands is one of these as well too. But like the guns you pick up have these stats that are higher than you got last time, and you use them to beat harder areas and do raids and get rewarded with more guns that have different colors and higher numbers. And those I just always like. I mean, any video game is just like a feedback loop in disguise, but these seem like the least disguised ones. And so that's why I don't like them. Like I want a little more pomp and circumstance. Like, I always just, I don't know, when I was playing, what's it called? Tears of the Kingdom, the new Legend of Zelda. No, not new anymore. It was actually keeping me hooked, and that hadn't been happening with video games for a bit. And it's just very funny if people say like, oh, it's such a good game and it's such a good gameplay loop. And it's like, what does good mean in this situation? Does this mean addictive? Because I think nicotine is a great feedback loop. Like, like you.
Yeah. I mean, that's what video game companies kind of want to do with live service games, which there was a big push in recent years. A lot of them have flopped, like the recent game Concord, which like barely sold any copies. And I learned through a news article this week, I think the investment in that game was at least 200 million. And it flopped that hard.
Wow.
It's kind
of
the
megalopolis of video games, truly.
So that was the first part of Pokemon's existence was the Pokemania craze. And then I think you disagreed with me a little bit in classifying this as a lull, but I think there was in the mid 2000s a lull because every other period of Pokemon's history has felt exponential.
Yeah.
And this was the only time they lost in popularity.
Or at least they maintained, and that is a loss, in capitalism. Like you have to be growing.
Yeah, because I think what Pokemon experienced is entirely natural, where things that become a little bit old, that's when things are at their most precarious for an idea or a franchise. So Pokemon became a little bit old, and I remember myself and my peers just losing a lot of interest in it personally.
Yeah, I guess this would be around Generation 3, right?
Yeah.
3 and 4, we'd expand this to be. Maybe
Yeah,
even into 5 as well, like early 2010s.
I would use 5 as a cutoff, as when maybe they got out of it. But the Pokemon Company wasn't even sure they were ever going to do a second game. But then there were even bigger questions about the third generation. It's like, okay, do we make another region? Like they realized that maybe this is something where they have to reinvent the wheel, but they didn't know they had a future.
Yeah, it feels like, I don't know, I see Generations 1 and 2 as very close together. And I mean, they are, because you can go back to Generation 1 in the Generation 2
games. Yeah, I group them together. I say I like those two generations. And yes, I'm nostalgic for Generation 3, but I kind of only like Generation 1 and 2.
Interesting. No, I don't know. Like, yeah, Generation 3 really sticks out to me. The way I got my Ruby version was we had a block party in Germany, and there's a whole bunch of other like young kids on our block, and it was all like there were 4 families on the block that all had an older sister and a younger brother, exactly an age of my sister and I. And then they all like at this block party, they all started dancing, and my sister was like, "Come on, you have to dance with me. All the other brothers and sisters are dancing." And I'm like, "No," and she's like, "I'll buy you Pokemon Ruby version if you do." And I'm like, "Oh, sold." Amazingly. And then we did the dancing, and then she's like, "I was lying, actually. I'm not going to do it." And I told my mom, and I was like, "Listen." And so I extracted a Pokemon Ruby version from my sister for that. I remember like going to the store and her going up to buy it and then handing it to me. It was just, I was the most shit-eating little child.
Yeah. I mean, I actually had bought Pokemon Sapphire for my brother technically, but then thankfully somehow it ended up mine. I don't know. I've always been like a very big gift giver. I give very complex and expensive gifts to people I care about. And that was one of them. I had bought my brother a Game Boy Advance and Pokemon Sapphire, but somehow it ended up with me. Yeah. I don't even think I like was annoying and fought for it. I guess he just got he grew out of it to some extent.
Yeah. No, my sister got Sapphire shortly after. I remember her being like, "This is the girl one." I remember her saying that.
I always feel like the main title is boy coded, and then the one that follows is girl coded. I mean, definitely with Pokemon Pearl.
Wait, you always think like first and second billing? Like
yeah, the second billing, I've always thought of that as being the girl one.
Oh wow. I always see them as like equal, but there's always one that like I don't know. I've never had any doubt of which one I was going to get. I guess I always buy the first one. Yeah.
Because it's boy coded.
Exactly. Wow. I really have this moment. Yeah, no. I didn't have a choice in blue, but then Ruby, Fire Red, Diamond, Black? Question mark? Yeah, so I guess I told the beginning of me being into Pokemon. I was probably into Pokemon a little bit longer than I should have been. Secretly well into high school. Yeah. I would say. Like at least the first 2 years. I don't know. I had a 3DS, like Black and White came out. When Diamond and Pearl came out when I was in like 5th grade, I like researched it extensively because the games come out in Japan first. I think they changed that eventually. They do like global releases now. Yeah. But I would like read all the information about it and spoil it for myself and then get the game. But over with Black and White, I had enough like marshmallow testability, enough like denial of pleasure to like just play the games clean when they came out.
Yeah. The only generations I ever skipped were 4 and then the most recent one. Oh. And I skipped 4 because I didn't have a Nintendo DS. I just missed out because I didn't get one for Christmas. But then the most recent one, well, I guess I played Generation 8 with an ex-boyfriend. He had a Switch. So I kind of feel like I played it. But yeah, the most recent one, we'll get to this with the Pokemon design section. I completely was just so flabbergasted with the designs when I saw the starters for Generation 9. I was like, I can't keep acting like I like this. These Pokemon look so silly and stupid.
No, you're totally right. But yeah, this lull, like I don't know. It's Pokemon is always having to contend with like a conceit that is inherently unsustainable. like gotta catch them all. You have to, and then they set the standard for themselves of like, oh yeah, I guess 100 Pokemon come out every generation. And then if they slightly, I think 5 had a lot less Pokemon.
6.
6
had like 70 new ones.
Yeah, and then people riot. Yeah. Like, so they keep on. They set a trajectory that's very hard to maintain, as we'll also talk about in the Pokemon design thing. Things get harder when you jump to 3D as well. Like you really multiply the labor required for all assets.
You'd make better designs, but no. Actually, the better the technology, the worse the design got.
No, constraints are good, as we often harp on.
Yeah. But yeah, I want to give 2 examples of the mid-2000s Pokemon lull. And then I'll give a third one actually of just, not just like anecdotes about me, but the 2 I want to give are just that like, I have always been very archival. I held on to basically all of the toys, all of the trading card games from my childhood, the exception being Pokemon. I regret that a lot. I don't have most of the cards. All of the toys are gone, and it's a regret of mine. And I think it just goes to show that like I just, along with all of my peers, Pokemon just became too ubiquitous and we lost interest.
Yeah.
And then another example that comes a little bit later was like, I have an uncle I'm not blood related to, this very wealthy guy in LA. My family's pissed off at him. We don't really talk to him now. But, you know, he would wheel and deal with people in Los Angeles and he knew celebrities, XYZ. Somehow he came across someone who works for the Pokemon company. And so when he was in Chicago on a trip here, he was like, oh, you'll never believe this. And then he brings out like a business card from someone who worked for the Pokemon company. And I remember it had like the Gen 4 starters, so like Chimchar and Piplup and Turtwig on it. And then he was like, oh, you know what? This person, they said that they can send me some free Pokemon swag. How about that? Are you hyped? Are you happy? And then I was like, actually, I don't really like Pokemon now. And then my family members, they're like jaws dropped and they're like, Nathan, that was rude.
Yeah, you don't pretend. Yeah. That's funny. As I'll get into later on the like the kid culture aspect of Pokemon, like the classic thing is like my uncle works at Game Freak, and he said that actually Mew can be found if you do this one trick over here or something. So he actually met someone who works there. It's a giant company, but yeah, that's so interesting to meet someone on the American side of it.
Yeah, but I don't think it was just me, again, in part because I looked up the Google Trends for Pokemon, which they started collecting data. It goes back on Google Trends to 2005 for any search term that you want to look up. And so 2005, I think, was in the midst of the Pokemon lull. And then if you see the graph, you know, it's just been very gradually increasing since 2005, with the exception of 2016, when it spikes up to 100 during the Pokemon Go craze. And it makes it hard to see the rest of the trend. Yeah. Okay, but that's a good part to talk about Pokemon's second peak, which was the 2016 Pokemon Go craze.
Yeah, people look back on this so fondly. Like it was like, you know, we were all together as a country, you know, just all hunting down Pokemon.
Go to the polls.
Pokemon go to the polls, as it was. Yes. I felt like my group of people was a little bit ahead of the curve on this. So the predecessor to Pokemon Go was made by this just random game company called Niantic. They had a game called Ingress, which was the same conceit of you go around on the physical map and you move around and there'd be ingress points and you'd capture them and you'd tag them or something. There'd be a little mini game you'd play. And there was one guy in my fraternity who was really into it and he got our fraternity house listed as an ingress point, actually. And then later when Pokemon Go happened, it got grandfathered into being a Pokemon gym. Wow. That's what the spots were called, right? Or there weren't Pokemon centers.
I barely played it.
Yeah, same.
It must have been a gym.
Yeah. Yeah, so as someone who was into Pokemon for a little too long, you know, like into high school, I then like completely dropped off in college, basically. And then this came out of nowhere, and now everyone was into Pokemon. And then I felt like, and I just did not like the game, as you agree with, right? You know?
I didn't like it. I played it for 2 weeks. I mean, before it came out, I was excited about it. I was telling people about it. And then the gameplay compared to the actual games was so dumb. It's catching
too
Pokemon.
Big of a gulf between the two. Like it seems like they were determined to not, like almost like they were bound by copyright law or something to not have any of the gameplay loops or features from the game, from the core games. Do you think they rectified this in time? I didn't really care enough to find out. Like what I just didn't like was you like combine Pokemon. You'll take like a level 16, a level 18, you'll combine them. And that just like compromises like a body, like it's just like body horror, I think, where it's like, that's not what you do to Pokemon. Like you either catch them, evolve them, release them. Like there's only a few things that can happen to them. You never fuse them together, like, and use them as consumables. Like it just seemed to violate some kind of like underlying premises I had about like how the games should act.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some Pokemon games outside of the main series ones, they oftentimes, the Pokemon, due to the gameplay mechanics of these other games, they just feel disposable. Like you don't attach yourself to them, which you wrote about in the docket. But yeah, I mean, the Pokemon games, they're very good. You know, in the very beginning, they're like, this is your starter Pokemon. You only get one, and it's one of your strongest, and you won't find any others in the game. They're good at like teaching the players to like have an attachment to the Pokemon.
Yeah, you can name them, like, you know, like you can teach them a move set that you really like, and like in later games you can't dress them up, no, but
no, there were features like that, photo. I never did that. I thought it was not that interesting.
But yeah, and then so I just felt like there was something key missing from the Pokemon Go games. And what they lacked in actual gameplay mechanics, they made up for in microtransactions, which always pissed me off. That was the other thing. It was just, it felt so, Nintendo stayed away from mobile games for a good chunk of time, and they like did it all at once. They had like some release keynote thing, like, all right, Mario's on there now. We got a Mario Infinite Runner game. We're bringing Pokemon Go is bigger than ever. And they just kind of like fell into everything. And it just seems, as slow moving and opaque and strange as Nintendo is, like I think it gives them a kind of gravitas and dignity. So just seeing like a Pokeball next to a dollar sign just seemed really messed up to me. Like, don't you want to buy more Pokeballs? Come on. If you get the season pass, you can even get a discount on them. Like it seems depraved.
Yeah. It was wild though how popular it did get. Like I would see people, because I used Facebook back in the time in 2016. But I remembered like seeing my friends' moms, they would post screenshots of like a Pidgeotto and be like, I caught this.
Yeah.
Like people who never would have been into it before.
No, my friend who like still actively plays it largely as a way to connect with his mom. Basically, they both just like trade back and forth. They like traveled somewhere. Like
better without the Candy Crush.
Yeah, no, this is great for the middle-aged woman's mind compared to Candy Crush. It will not melt it down into nothing.
But where do they travel to? Chicago? Because that's where the Pokemon Go Fest has happened a few times. Like one time,
is it still
I was
going?
downtown and in Maggie Daly Park, there was this giant egg. And I was like, what is this giant egg? And then I go up to it and it's like Pokemon.
Was it like a Pokemon egg with the green spots?
It was like a Pokemon. I had no idea what was going on.
A Togepi egg?
What?
Like a Togepi egg?
No, I don't remember it having like a design on it, but it was a giant egg with some sort of a screen on it.
Bizarre.
Yeah, because you hatch eggs in Pokemon and in Pokemon Go. So I guess that's why it was there.
Yeah. So the 2016 boom due to Pokemon Go. And this had the feedback loop I described like previously, the feedback loop between like the anime and the video games, like both trying to make sense of each other. And then with Pokemon Go, like, you know, the company had just like so much money on their hands. They're like wondering like, what do we do with this? Like, how does this interact with the rest of Pokemon media? And so they released the Pokemon Let's Go games, Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu. That was like pastiche of the Gen 1 games. You return back to the Kanto region, but it had catching mechanics like from Pokemon Go. And then also you could transfer in a one direction way Pokemon from Pokemon Go into Let's Go.
Yeah.
And so I think viewed generously, it was trying to unite these two things together. And I think viewed cynically, it's trying to get core Pokemon players, like core game players, into the microtransaction world of Pokemon Go.
I thought that game seemed very marketed to children. I mean, they all are, but that one especially. I felt like they...
simplified, right?
I mean, based off of some of the things I was seeing in the teraleak, you know, it's very clear that they think about their consumer base. Like when they're planning a movie or a new game, they'll be like, okay, we think this will appeal to Western adults or this will appeal to children. And I think Let's Go, it definitely was just so like, I think it was for like little kids whose parents would give them their phone and then they'd play Pokemon Go a bit. And then they were like, okay, but we want to keep them on board with the main series game. So they created that as an introduction.
Right. So maybe the more charitable view is correct. That like, they're trying to bring people into the core game fold. Like if you liked Pokemon in this, you'd love it, and it's more standardized format.
Yeah, that's the way I read it.
Yeah.
And then one more thing about the craze was, did you ever see the video of where like thousands of Pokemon Go players rushed Central Park to catch Vaporeon?
No. Also, just Vaporeon? Like, this just doesn't seem like an amazing...
No, Vaporeon is... I mean, all the evolutions are strong. They're... Okay. Wow, I'm such a nerd. Okay, they are strong. They're good Pokemon.
Oh, yeah. Like, they're well-designed and stuff. I think
No, I mean, they're like EV, IVs, whatever.
Oh.
Like, internal, like... Yeah, they're good to play with.
All their sweaty features.
Yeah. Okay. And then we can talk about the final Pokemania craze, which was the most recent. This was the lockdown and post-pandemic Pokemania craze. And this one's a little bit different in that it wasn't love all around. I think that this was specifically in regards to childhood media, particularly the cards. And around this time, the Pokemon games started to get public criticism for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I stayed out of this craze. I don't know. The cards were never the main. As a kid, I loved the cards. Didn't know how to play the game at all. It was just the collecting. That's the nice part for me.
They had nice art.
Yeah, no. And putting them in the binders was very satisfying. You'd bring it over to your friend's house. You both flop out your giant binders and look and trade for cards. And in Germany, I'd trade like the German kids, and my friend Michael would act as like a translator between us. Yeah, and so I had a few German cards, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, didn't get into, say, like the Pokemon card craze. I mean, I did, though, during the pandemic. I went through my whole archive of childhood toys, which, as I mentioned, I kept almost everything. And then bemoaning the loss of the Pokemon media, I actually went on eBay and bought some Pokemon things, like some Burger King Pokemon toys. Okay, it was 2020. I'm different.
Yeah, yeah. No, we all did strange stuff in 2020. It's all right, man. It's just... Yeah. Oh, when I think of something strange I've done in 2020, I'll let you know.
Yeah, but I knew about this though because there were videos on social media of like people flooding Walmarts and Targets and buying up all the available Pokemon stock in like 2 minutes, or not even 2 minutes, like 20 seconds.
There's just something so like about the swishing of the cargo shorts as they all storm in.
Yeah,
like, out of breath. I could just tell their eyes are beady. Like, you can't see anyone's eyes. You can just tell, like, just the desperation. Like, how these people have, like, dispensed of all social convention because there's money to be made. And there's basically, my issue with the cards is kind of my issue with, like, microtransactions as well, too. I hate artificial scarcity of any kind. It's a big trigger for me. I mean, this makes stuff like diamonds look like much more dignified, and that's like a semi-artificial scarcity,
Yeah, I mean, there's always something undignified about running, especially in a crowd. Like, my sister once worked with this woman who she told this story about. She saw people in Las Vegas at a casino running to the buffet, and she was like, she made a bunch of fat jokes. That's not the point, though. I just think it is very undignified to just like stampede something. And I'll put a link in the show notes to this stampede video.
Yeah, just being with a whole bunch of people all moving as one. I don't know. When people, like, the second the plane touches down, everyone just gets up to go and leave. And it's like, hey, we're at the back of the plane. Like, we don't get to go right now. It's just, I don't know. I think that, like, life gives you lots of, as I said earlier, marshmallow tests. And, like, you really know someone by their ability to deny pleasure or delay pleasure.
It's true.
But yeah, I've just been, like, any kind of, because with card rarity, like, they're just things printed. Like, they could print more of them, they choose not to. Like, they just artificially constrain their supply, and that confers it value. This is why I hated NFTs. This is why, and you know what this all goes back to? Neopets for me. I remember when they first introduced, like, Neocash, where you could buy exclusive cosmetics for your Neopets, and I was like, why would I spend my hard-earned allowance on
those paintbrushes were special, though.
I wanted to earn them. I didn't want to buy them. It felt like there's this dirtiness in the real world of money that I didn't like coming into my, like, pure world of video games. You know?
Yeah. And it wasn't just Pokemon cards that were, like, increasing in value. Like, I used to play this card game back in the day that was very, like, Zillennial coded, called Chaotic, and I was relatively good at it. I went to tournaments. It could actually come back. We'll see if it does.
Here's how Bernie could still win. Here's how Chaotix could still be the biggest game in America.
Yeah, but Chaotic, I think it shut down maybe, I would say 2014, 2013. I kind of forget when the card game officially ended, but I still had all of my cards. Again, being an archivist of my childhood, I had all of them. And I had this one card that had gone up to $900, which is wild when you consider this card game had not existed for like almost 10 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a friend who almost made $1,000 off of selling a hat in Team Fortress 2, the PC game, like the Valve developed game. Yeah. I just don't get it. It just feels like everyone's talking a language that I'm not understanding. Just with,
I mean, with
like,
trading card
cosmetics.
games, there's a reason for the value, which is that like you can beat the game. You can play other players and have better cards.
Yeah, that's at least a step better than digital cosmetics.
Yeah.
I just lump these all together. They just are all bad.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah. Yeah, so then part of this like renewed interest in Pokemon, I think put between Pokemon Go and the Pokemon card craze, I think there's more eyes than usual on the release of the core games.
Yeah.
And so the newest ones are Scarlet and Violet, and it's not been a lot of love, I would say.
No. And I think that Sword and Shield had released actually shortly before the pandemic started. Yeah. I remember playing it with my ex-boyfriend shortly before the lockdown started. But yeah, those were unpopular because of what's called Dexit, which I'll bring this up again at the very end. But basically, all the Pokemon games prior to Sword and Shield, you couldn't catch every single Pokemon in the games, but you could import them theoretically. It would be a lot of work, but you could.
Yeah.
And I mean, as the Pokemon National Pokedex was approaching, 800, 700, the Pokemon Company was like, this is too much for us. We have to limit this going forward. And fans got pissed off. So they're pissed about that. And then when Scarlet and Violet came out, they were just pissed about the graphics. Just because they're the best selling media franchise of all time, highest grossing, the Pokemon Company and Game Freak, they don't have to work as hard to get the money that they get,
Yeah, part of it, like on the national dex stuff, that is the scope creep we were kind of talking about, that they've set themselves up for something kind of untenable, which is, having like 3D models, animations, attack animations, like for close to 1,000 Pokemon.
No, now it's 8,000.
Yeah, that one, the thousandth.
They got to 1,000.
Just a gold guy, right?
Give me ghoul. I didn't play that game, so I don't know the mechanic, but you have to collect coins or something. It's probably hard to get. It doesn't even look cool.
No, it doesn't.
Like most new Pokemon.
Yeah. But, so yeah, they had all the eyes on them and they still messed it up. It's just back to that second party thing. Like, I don't know how they distribute resources at Nintendo, but one would think you'd give a little bit more to Game Freak just to have them not mess up, basically. Like, just to have, I think of all the accusations you can level against Nintendo games, they've, in the first party sense, usually been pretty well optimized, as a nature of being the company that makes the hardware and the software. They usually run pretty well. And so just having them bungle that just seems like such an elemental thing. Like it's just stumbling at the first step. And then the design's not being good. Yeah, then you fumble on the second step there too.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's really just the designs, but there's other things you can complain about too. But
let's talk about positive stuff. What do we like about the games?
Yeah. Yeah, because that's part of why we're doing Pokemon this week. It's because we could have talked about other video game franchises or just gaming in general, like was requested, but I feel like it would have been a very negative episode. But we do like Pokemon. And I think there are a lot of innovations they came up with. I mean, the entire monster taming genre is the result of Pokemon Red and Blue. And then just a lot of the innovations they came up with in the game, like Pokemon types and evolution, those are mechanics that now are kind of universal in a way, or not universal, but that idea is so ingrained in people's mind that it can be adopted by other games and people don't really think about it. Yeah.
It's interesting of the whole like monster catching genre. Like, I don't know. I think there's some convergent evolution there with like stuff like Beyblade, like the other kind of competing series. Digimon is of course like
Bakugan.
Bakugan, that one. And it seems like only really Digimon and Pokemon get to survive into nowadays. Is Bakugan still going?
No, it had a re-release a few years ago. I feel like I've seen it in the Target toy aisle at some point, but no, there was another
Bakugan
franchise
was balls, right?
There was another franchise after Bakugan. It was called like not Doraemon. It was like Yokai Watch.
Oh yeah,
which how I remembered that just now. I have a really funny story about this. So at my very first library I worked at, I was helping this one woman, and she was logged into the shypublive.org website, and she was like, how do I not check this book out? And I was like, what book? And she was trying to check out Yokai Watch. And she was this 8-year-old woman.
What? A manga book of Yokai Watch?
Yeah, and I literally burst out laughing, and I was like, what? Like, why are you trying to check this out? And she was like, I don't want this. It's for kids.
That would be really funny to see an 8-year-old woman try and read through a manga.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
She was cool.
Yeah,
I
think
liked her.
Obviously what brings people to the games is the Pokemon themselves, like the designs. But I think I'm a big world explorer. I like that part. I like the overworlds a lot. I think this is my thing with Dark Souls as well, too. I read one article that kind of aligned with me on this, but it's like, I'm not that good at video games. I don't know. I don't think my like raw like input time, decision-making ability, that kind of stuff, I'm probably below average. But I like playing the Dark Souls games, even though they're so hard, because I just like to get to the next area. I just like the progression. I like building out my guy. The boss fights are interesting, but like I just love unfolding and unlocking the world. And that's the appeal for me. I just have to get at least good enough to get to the next area. And so, yeah, I like that kind of like seeing this large Pokemon world. And then I like the blocks. I like how you can't progress until you unlock something. I don't know. I just like the pacing. I like when it really is properly paced and you like explore a route for the first time. It feels really good. Like you are like turning a corner that you haven't seen before.
Yeah. And I think you wrote about HMs in the docket and how you like them. I did too, because we should explain Pokemon feel more real.
Yeah. For the listener, like hidden moves or HMs were these moves you could use outside of battle. And so you could cut down a tree, you could surf on your Pokemon, you could fly around. And those, I don't know, it's one of those very important steps made to help with the illusion that these Pokemon are actually real things and not just data sets and pictures that appear every so often. Because there is just always, I mean, especially in the early games, this disconnect between the overworld and the battle, basically. And it looks like this has kind of been solved in the recent games. Like I was watching footage of Pokemon Legends Arceus, and it's a very seamless thing. You're just running around, and then you start battling a Pokemon, but you can still walk around. Like it's not a separate world. It doesn't cut away to this strange, abstract place where battles happen, as was the previous solution in 3D games. It's always hard.
Yeah, it is. And then another thing I liked about the games was just like the OG Pokemon artwork, which these were drawn by Ken Sugimori. So he's another one of the original Pokemon developers, and he served as sort of the primary character designer for the franchise initially. And he designed a lot of iconic Pokemon like Gengar, Lapras, and Snorlax. But his original watercolor illustrations of all the 151 Pokemon, they just present the Pokemon in so many like interesting and colorful ways. It's really like, I was looking at some of the newer Pokemon artwork for like, what was the one I was looking at? It was like the one based off whipped cream, and it looks so flat. It looks almost CGI, and I don't even think they're probably doing these illustrations by hand anymore.
Yeah, Generation 1 and 2 have that very distinctive watercolor look. That is just totally lost in Generation 3. Like things just got a lot like flatter. I mean, there's still gradients on stuff, but it's just not that watercolor gradient. Like it lends itself so well to nostalgia. There's so much character that comes through these illustrations. Yeah. And then my soft spot, we're talking about the cards and the card art. That was like half the appeal of collecting the cards, is having really cool looking, powerful Pokemon. But I really like the clay art of Yukamori. There's a Trapinch one that's just amazing. He's so cute. I want to like protect him. He's so good. But yeah, it's just these little like clay miniatures that look like, I don't know, so good. I kind of want to eat them is my like weird kind of impulse when I see them. But yeah, there was like also very kind of C-punky or like net art style 3D ones as well, like rudimentary 3D modeling ones.
I like her art a lot too. I mean, one of the ones she did was this one of Corsola. And Corsola, I'm going to get to this, you know, it's one of the Pokemon I've thought of as my favorite at various points. It's a very good Pokemon to like. It's pink, but I did like Corsola. I still do. And I like her art a lot too, because I mean, as a kid looking at it, it makes you think about Pokemon literally being in real life. Like the little clay models she'd make, and then she'd put them on grass, and you'd be like, oh, what if I saw Bulbasaur in the grass?
They're just, I mean, because so often we see these original artworks of Pokemon, and they're just like kind of hovering in space, and to see them placed in something.
Oh, those ones
really
hovering
nice.
in space though are like also nostalgic.
Yeah,
I like those too.
Yeah, and then this next thing I like about the games is like it's something you just like about childhood too, which is like the kind of knowledge sharing and kind of group troubleshooting that I saw happen with my friends and I with the Pokemon games. Like it was just like, yeah, I remember my cousin had this beautifully illustrated game guide to Gen 2.
Yeah.
I never played those games, but I loved reading that game guide. It was just so interesting. And it had a lot of like color commentary on the game as well too. A lot of love went into those game guides back in the day. I owned one for Twilight Princess.
Yeah.
I remember.
I had Pokemon game guides where the content on the inside was Pokemon, but then the cover wouldn't be a Pokemon. It was some copyright thing.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever see those?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this one just had like, yeah, they had to deal with
It'd
it.
be like these weird monsters on the cover for some reason.
Oh, just different like off-brand Pokemon, just Aldi brand.
I remember as a kid being like, "What is that?"
Oh,
like,
man. I think this one might have been an official one actually.
Yeah,
The
I mean there were
game
official ones
was,
too.
But yeah, so like, and one of the pieces of child knowledge like shared between each other was missing no. So in the Generation 1 games, there was this glitch you could activate where you'd generate this Pokemon. There was a missing number, basically. It was some kind of strange artifact.
Because they're originally supposed to be 191 Pokemon in the original Pokemon games. They're 151, but they didn't fully delete the files. So like you could generate these Pokemon that shouldn't have existed.
Yeah, and I was like taught how to do this by some like sketchy kid that I met when I was at my grandparents in upstate New York, and he's like, "No, there's a secret Pokemon. I'm going to teach you how to use it." And you could use it to get infinite items as well and money, which is useful in the first games because after you beat all the trainers and you can't rebattle them, there's no way to get money in Generation 1. So it's got like a fundamentally broken end game. So this glitch can actually help you fix it, basically.
Yeah.
But the sociologist William Bainbridge like observed his daughter encountering and trying to trigger this glitch, and he like wrote papers about it, basically, of how when kids teach themselves how to activate the glitch, they're pulling back the curtain of the game and they're realizing that it's not like as magical as it seems, but it makes kids more interested in it.
Yeah.
Like as they start to kind of like push the envelope of what the system kind of is capable of, they just get more interested by it. And I'm sure that there's some video game developers out there who can like trace their interest in games as like a back to missing no and kind of like understanding and seeing the man behind the curtain.
I mean, people have always wanted to see the man behind the curtain with Pokemon games. So it's part of why the teraleak was so fascinating to me and everyone else.
Yeah, you can just see the tight control they have over the IP. You know, and so
it's
that
makes
it makes you want to say like, all right, anything outside of like the tightly governed.
Like I think I've heard of figures before. Like Game Freak has very few employees, like maybe a couple hundred, and I think I read once like the profit per employee is $1 million or something. Like they really do not have that big of a team.
Wow. Yeah, but yeah, and then. So if that's the like puzzle solving they didn't intend for you to do, I liked the puzzle solving they actually did want you to do. One of my best memories of like Generation 3 is hunting down the Reggies, Registeel, Regice, Regirock. You had to decode Braille in order to find them.
I was too dumb for that. I didn't even know how to. I mean, I remember going to the ruins in Pokemon Sapphire and like going around them and being like, I feel like this is something, I don't get it. But you actually figured it out on your own?
No, I had to use like guides and stuff. Oh. But yeah, because there's something you have to have a Relicanth in your party as you go to this one
Too
thing.
Specific. Yeah, you couldn't figure that out on your own.
Yeah, some of them were a little strange. But I think one I genuinely did figure out was like, you have to go to this rock when it's raining. I was like, oh, I can do that. Amazing. I just really like those Pokemon in general. I like the Reggies. I think they look like esoteric and strange.
One of them makes like a really funny sound.
I think it's Registeel. It's like very high pitched or something.
Yeah, I've seen some really good memes about it.
Yeah. But yeah, and I just like that. I like when the games lean into their kind of weirdness or creepiness I would say. I don't know why there's so much like Pokemon like creepy pasta content out there. People want to see their like childhood get corrupted in something, but I don't see why people need to stay up at night like writing this stuff when it already is. Like in the early games, there is just a general darkness that's pretty like not there in the later games. Like there's cemeteries. Well, no, cemeteries do come back in other games. But yeah, there's like a much stronger sense of the macabre.
Yeah. So I want to ask you on this section about favorites. What's your favorite Pokemon?
I really liked when they came out with Steel Pokemon in Generation 2. I just think that might be my favorite type. I really like that character Steven in Generation 3 who has like gray hair and is wearing a suit. Yeah. I remember him?
No, I don't.
I think he's an elite. He's like the Elite Four guy at the end, but they don't like reveal that at first. He's just like a cool bon vivant going around.
Yeah. I mean, do you know the first Steel type gym leader from Gen 2? She has a Steelix and 2 Magnemite. She's this pretty girl, and the juxtaposition is like makes her really cool.
Yeah,
I don't know her name,
but so I would say I think Aggron might be my favorite. One of the many like Godzilla-esque kind of Pokemon, but I don't know, he's cool as a giant metal lizard. I just think that like I think when the whole evolutionary line is good, you know, that's when I really like something. I mean, Lairon is kind of just a necessary middle one. You can kind of tell sometimes they design like the first one and the third one and they just have to come up with something in the middle.
I feel like the middle evolutions in the first generation, they have a lot more character. Like some of them really stand out to me, like Poliwhirl, you know, but most of them don't.
Yeah.
You know which middle evolution I hated though as a kid? Gloom.
The
drool. I just could not. Like, I hated it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But my favorite Pokemon, I've had a few over the years. As a kid, it was Scyther because I like the color green. But then I started like the color blue, and I got into water type Pokemon. And so I've had a few. I'd say like Corsola, Cloyster, and Starmie kind of stand out to me the most.
Wow.
I like those ones.
Yeah, very Sea-Punk.
Yeah, very misty.
Yeah, misty coated.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then what the games generally lack. Like
so this isn't positive or negative, it's kind of in between.
Yeah. It's just kind of, I don't know, like specifically with the core games. I think the hardest thing for these is, I mean, other than the fact that of how hard it is to catch them all, like that conceit. But they'd started doing away with that catchphrase in like Generation 3 or 4, right? Gotta catch them all when they realized how hard it got.
Yeah.
But yeah, the game has always struggled with end game. After you beat the Elite Four, it's just kind of like, what do I do? I remember just kind of having this general emptiness. I remember my battery died in the games. That would always happen after a certain amount of time when you had the Gen 3 games. Yeah, so I couldn't like... berries wouldn't regrow. There was like, it just felt like the world just kind of died around me. I would just visit like where legendary Pokemon used to be and think about how cool it would be to see their sprite again. Like, and the fact you can't have multiple game saves either. Like, you can't really restart them.
Do you remember how many hours you racked up? For me, it was like 200 on Sapphire.
Oh yeah, like 300, something like that.
Yeah, it's like, what was I doing?
Yeah, what was I doing in that post game? Like the best first 70 hours. Then after that, it's just.
Yeah. I mean, I would find. Like as a little kid, because I was, you know, partially literate, I would find things I'd missed, you know, in the 100 other hours I stumbled around the map. Like I remember finding Beldum. I missed that the first time around.
Yeah.
So things like that.
I just remember like you get to that point where you realize like, oh, I haven't seen like a Pokemon item sprite in so long. Like, I haven't seen a little like Pokeball thing. Like it's just nothing's in this world anymore. I've interacted with every interactable object.
And you're not even encouraged to like restart the game or, you know, because there's only one save file. It sucks in that way. But you know what Pokemon game did have an amazing end game? Pokemon Gold and Silver. Because that was the second generation. The region was Johto. And you could go back to Kanto once you beat Johto's Elite Four. And you could challenge all the gym leaders.
It's such a good value.
And I watched a video on this today, you know, just getting excited for the episode. There's actually a maglev train that takes you from the two regions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did Japan even have an operating maglev?
In the 90s, yeah. Because they launched their system, I think, in the 60s. Or their, not maglev, but their Shinkansen. Yeah, just their high-speed rail.
Interesting. What is it called? So, like, Diamond and Pearl, and then you have, what's the other one after that?
Black and White?
No. The
Diamond, Pearl, Crystal.
No.
Oh, no, Diamond, Pearl, Platinum.
Platinum, yeah.
Yeah.
But the 1.5 or whatever those are, those always seem to have better end games. Yeah. Like the Battle Frontier is really good in Emerald. I've heard from people. Yeah, Black and White 2. I kind of want to pick those ones up. I don't own a 3DS of any kind, but I've been looking on eBay. I think I might buy a 3DS just to play Black and White 2 after this episode. We'll see. I'll cool down after a week of thinking about Pokemon for the first time in 6 years.
I know, because like for me with this episode, I was like, you know what? I kind of always wanted to play Pokemon pinball.
That's a cute one to get back into. Like, it's like, it's so harmless. Like,
yeah. I mean, so I've been playing that over the past few weeks, and I caught 60 of them. I got better at pinball in general. Wow. But yeah, I also got Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which by many Pokemon fans and Stan's opinion is the best Pokemon game of all time.
Yeah.
I got that on an emulator on my phone. I got close to starting it just for fun, but then other things got in the way. Thankfully, I didn't start it. I might not now, because as much as I liked Pokemon, it's good to be productive and not waste my life on this stuff.
That kind of dovetails into what I was going to talk about later, which is just the kind of gameplay loop itself. Like the fact that Pokemon is always going to be like a turn-based JRPG. And that term is always interesting, like Japanese RPG. Like only with this type of game do we specify like the region that it's like of the world that it's from when talking about its gameplay. But it just has so many, idiosyncrasies that it is a pretty useful term. And I think that for a lot of people, like they don't play other JRPGs, they just play Pokemon. That was kind of my thing. Like I was never a Final Fantasy kid. I wasn't smart enough to play Fire Emblem, as a kid. Advance Wars, any of those other like turn-based games. But as a kid, I always kind of fantasized about a world where like the combat would be real time in Pokemon. But people don't actually want that. They think that they want that. But that would take away from the kind of like laziness of Pokemon, which is that like you can just kind of like play it and then like, I don't know, check something. Like you can set your device down and come back to it later and nothing will have changed. Yeah. I think people like that part of it. There was like a Pokemon fighting game, Pokken Tournament. It's like Pokemon Tekken combined.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Not. It was on the Wii U, so that kind of screwed it. And then they re-released it. It has some devoted fans. I almost watched too long of a video about its competitive scene. And I'm like, wait, I hate fighting games, and I don't care about any of this. That was close. I almost spent 10 minutes.
I mean, at least you can relate to Zoomers a little bit more, because they oftentimes watch YouTube videos about gaming more than they game.
Oh, that's totally me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just.
Yeah.
And then so speaking of people taking things very competitively, this is an interesting category of things that people like about the Pokemon games that we personally disagree with.
Yep. So this is the negative section. Okay, so to start out, I think Pokemon competitive play for the video games is ridiculous. It's just like
squeezing the last bit of fun out of it until it isn't. Like
it literally is not fun. And like I feel like it's not even about the Pokemon a lot of the time. It's about like their nature. It's about like the item they're holding. Yeah. It's about like, just all of these mechanics that aren't even about like the Pokemon fighting. Mm-hmm. And then the Pokemon that are the most useful in competitive play are oftentimes the most ridiculous and whack looking. Like, Tornadus and Thundurus? Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're Gen 5 legendaries that are based off the weather, and they just look so bad. Yeah. And so oftentimes whenever I've seen videos of Pokemon competitive play, it's like, this is not like what I'd see in the movies as a kid of like a Nidoking King taking down like Golem, it's like
gods in the sky,
bad looking. Yeah, no, I mean the truly strong legendaries are usually banned from play, but like the less strong ones you can use.
Ones, or the demi legendaries, and
like stuff. the legendary birds you can use, but not Mewtwo.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's just I don't know. I've never had this. It's the same thing as like Smash Bros. It's this thing I think should be enjoyed casually. Don't get so damn serious about it. Yeah, it just always alienates me.
Because they have to spend like a truly horrid amount of time breeding the best Pokemon. Because internally, each Pokemon generated by the games, it has what are called like EVs, and then you can get IVs.
It's nature and nurture, basically. Like it has some stats. It's like predetermined to have. Yeah, and then it's clever features. Like these exist to create some kind of like variety in the stats for Pokemon, so not every Starmie is going to have the exact same attack, defense, special defense, all that. And so it actually matters what Pokemon you battle. These are like great ideas. I really think that like mathematically, these are clever things to like make you feel like that there is a nature and a nurture to every Pokemon. Like you can move.
But you know how like people who play Pokemon competitively spend most of their time? It's not actually in battles. It's really, really not. Instead, it's them hatching Pokemon eggs by running on a bike back and forth for like a few minutes. And they have to do that like thousands of times sometimes to get like a good enough Pokemon.
Yeah.
It's honestly sad.
I would always have my favorite stretch to ride the bike down in each game in order to like level stuff up, but not really for that. It's just because I wanted like a Pokemon that I needed to hatch from an egg.
Just because you're an aspiring cyclist.
Yes, exactly. I've always been biking. That's also one thing. I don't know where to put this in the episode, but the kind of Pokemon urbanism, like I was just so amazed by like the Pokemon world. I'm like, where are the cars? There's like no cars in like Generation 1 besides that one truck that you can see off of off in the water. But I was like, wow, is this like I always thought Pokemon was in like either the past or like the future in some way. I can never figure it out, but it just actually takes place in Japan, and that's just like
it's just in a 90s alternate reality.
Yeah, basically.
Where like there's computers, but
and no one seems to have jobs.
And you don't go to school.
No one goes to school.
Yeah. And then another thing I'm not a big fan of is the trading card game. Because the mechanics of the TCG are loosely based off Magic the Gathering. And Magic the Gathering has this like system where you get mana from lands. And so in Pokemon, the TCG, you get energy from energy cards.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be that way. I'm sure like they didn't put that much thought into the TCG when they first came out with it. And they've had to stick with it for decades, even though it doesn't make sense.
That's kind of like the core games in some sense of just like, you whatever you build out, you have to stick with in later games. That's what I've seen like commentary on the features they introduce in the new games seem very primed to be able to be put in and taken out.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Like stuff like Mega Evolutions like doesn't really like you could just not have those in the next game and people just have to deal with it.
They're coming back with them actually.
Yeah.
According to the leaks. And the next games that are going to come out, Pokemon ZA, they're coming back.
Yeah. Legends ZA.
Legends ZA. Because of Zygarde. Sorry to the audience. We're dropping too many
nerding
Pokemon
out
names.
on this.
I know.
Yeah, it's hard to be cool and detached on this. Oh, this is a really dumb aside. Speaking of the trading cards, my cousin, when we were kids, his dad's business partner brought some cards from Japan, and my cousin told me that all Japanese cards have a secret special extra move, which is karate chop, which is the dumbest thing.
That was made up, right?
Yeah, man. It's just because they're Japanese and their kids are like,
no, I'm just gullible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. So the next thing we have on stuff we don't like, legendaries and mythical Pokemon.
Yeah, I think legendaries in Generation 1 and 2 felt special because they're only a handful. But then after that, starting with Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, they became mascots that you got a Master Ball to catch. Yeah. And I think ever since, they just freely will give them out like once a month. They're like, oh, here's the free legendary of the month. Like here's a Reggie or whatever. And you don't have to work for them in the same way.
They're also just like when they're built into the story, they are less weird and esoteric. It doesn't feel like you're stumbling upon them.
Yeah.
I guess that's what's nice about like Gen 3, like kind of has its cake and eats it too, because you could like the Reggies were, just totally off to the side of everything. And I guess actually catching Rayquaza, who knows?
Yeah.
Is like not super necessary, even though it has a place in the plot.
Can you catch Rayquaza in Ruby and Sapphire or just Emerald?
You go to the tower.
Okay.
Whatever it's called. But
yeah, I didn't have the guide. I didn't know this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and then another thing people take too seriously, shiny hunting. So to the listener, shiny Pokemon is, there used to be a roughly 1 in 1,000 chance that a Pokemon would have an alternate color.
1 in 8,000.
1 in 8,000?
Yep.
Oh my God.
Now it's at base level 1 in 4,000. Right. But they've added mechanics that make it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, well, before those mechanics were around, I caught myself some shinies in Sapphire it's just so crazy. My entire childhood of like playing Pokemon games. Wait, no, I had a shiny Golbat. Yeah, I do remember that.
Wow.
But no, and then over the span of 2 weeks in high school, I picked up Sapphire out of nowhere because I was on a lot of flights and killing time. And I caught a shiny purple Wurmple, always fun to say, and a shiny Volbeat. And I kind of hate both those Pokemon, but life gives you...
like Beautifly?
No.
Dust Moth, whatever?
No, that does nothing for me. just a bird, just a bug.
Yeah. I caught a few shiny Pokemon. Like, first one I caught was a shiny Mienfoo in Gen 5. I also caught a shiny Rhyhorn and a shiny Sentret in Pokemon X. But I've never liked the idea of shinies because the people, similar to, I guess, how much time that Pokemon VGC fans spend on a bicycle just trying to hatch eggs, I feel like it's so sad how much time people spend shiny hunting.
Yeah.
Like they'll literally spend hours and hours and hours of their life trying to get a shiny Pokemon because I feel like they're chasing a high from the childhood that they'll never get back.
Yeah, it seems to have more in common with gambling than it does with video gaming. I would say like
You're like more likely to win like $2 off the lottery than get a shiny.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good, I don't know, someone who would have had a gambling problem otherwise is just, sinking time into shiny hunting, but not sinking any money. So that's something good. Maybe we should keep that around.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that like there are so many other things Pokemon could do to make Pokemon feel special. Like, I mean, a lot of the early ideas they had of like a Crystal Steelix or, Spinda having all of the different patterns to make it unique. Like there are other things they could do to make Pokemon feel special.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. Spinda, I forgot about that one. Yeah. It's like a dizzy koala bear thing, but then it's pattern.
Red panda.
Oh, yeah. And that's kind of cool. It's like, randomly generated Pokemon designs.
Yeah. I don't know. On negativity. Okay. So the biggest decline in the Pokemon franchise and the sole reason I stopped playing, as I mentioned, is the Pokemon designs. So I want to talk in this section about how Pokemon designs change over time. I'll put a link in the show notes to a video called How Pokemon's Art Style and Design Has Evolved. It basically details how Pokemon designs have gotten cuter, rounder, and flatter over time compared to the original 151 Pokemon. This is partly because the Red and Blue games were so limited, and the way you had to represent the Pokemon was in black and white with very little detail.
Yeah, so they had to really pop.
Yeah, they had to create much simpler designs than they did in later generations. And I just feel like so much got lost. I'll put another link in the show notes to this video that's what would Gen 8 Pokemon look like in Gen 1 to just provide evidence of the new Pokemon, they don't have to look the way they look. They could look cooler. They could look a lot less dumb with big heads. Because, even more links, I'm sorry. But I'll link to things I found through Reddit, which are basically graphics of how the design styles changed over time. There's this really good one I found that shows what the average Pokemon sort of looks like per generation.
I like that one, yeah.
Yeah. It has some really good points. For Generation 2, most designs, they randomly had a circle on the stomach and then...
we're brown.
Yeah. Generation 4. I always felt like I didn't like Generation 4 because there were so many cross-generational evolutions that just got really big and bloated, the
it took up more space, yeah.
Or the Tangrowth evolution.
Gen 3 gets flack for just having random armbands and circles and kind of just markings that are kind of just visual clutter.
Yeah.
From stuff.
Do you feel like you independently arrived at these observations, or is any of this?
I had to really look at there's just a gestalt sense of wait, these don't look as good. I just have that. But then if I actually try and imagine it, it's interesting to see the different, broad themes throughout each generation.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're just kind of writing themselves into a corner. There's no animals left. they have plumbed the most obscure, animals. We've already done purple squirrel. And so now they're really getting into this strange stuff. And then, of course, the hop into inanimate objects, the trash bag, the ice cream cone, that kind of stuff. It's also just, I think that itself was just kind of a big jump that happened kind of in Generation 3 or 4. But just, how do I explain this? Pokemon having characteristics what's that one Weasel that has arm floaties? That thing. Floatzel.
Beweasel?
I don't know.
Something like that.
It's something ottery. It's an otter that has arm floaties.
Weasel. Something like that. Okay.
But that would not have existed in Gen 1 because it's it kind of raises this question of wait, are humans mimicking the floating arms of that? Is that it's just there's I guess a sense of whimsy and I don't know how to describe it, but that is present in later things that is not a type of logic.
They feel less animalistic.
Yeah.
I never really bought
They start wearing clothes.
I never bought into that idea as much because in Generation 1, there are so many good single stage evolution bipedal Pokemon like Mr. Mime, Electabuzz, Magmar, and Jinx. They looked a little bit human, but they were some of the coolest ones out there.
I love a good strange no evolution Pokemon.
I
just
do
kind
too.
of a one shot.
I think
them. They're prime numbers. There's just something kind of off about them.
And other future games, they really have few and far between with those. There aren't that many.
Man.
Yeah.
Or like they won't be left single evolution. Like everything that was a single evolution now has some weird evolution off of it, you know?
Yeah. One thing I do want to bring up too is just that, like, I think Game Freak and the Pokemon Company, they figured out there is a really strong appetite for the style of Generation 1 because of how popular Pokemon Go was. Because after that happened with the Lola region in Sun and Moon, they released what are called regional variants. And all the regional variants in Alola, they were all Gen 1 Pokemon that they just made
with a remix.
New. But I think they went in completely the wrong direction because instead of trying to make new Pokemon look Gen 1, they made Gen 1 Pokemon look new.
Yeah.
Like the Alola and Raichu they came out with, it's riding a surfboard of its tail. But if you look at it, it's like feet and eyes and just how rounded the design
would have
features
never
are
been done in
compared to Raichu. It's like, it really sucks.
It's like
what happened with it.
It's not the individual Pokemon that people are drawn to from them. It's the general design ethos. Like a person can't tell you that, but it's like it's what they don't know that they want.
Yeah, like they can't be like, oh, I like the angry anime eyes from the 90s and the cat ears. But that is what they like.
Yeah, no. I picture Nidorino.
Yeah.
And all those. Yeah, that's a very classic Gen 1 type Pokemon.
That was one of the first ones ever designed, actually. Like one of the first 15.
I always heard Rhyhorn and like Nidorino, something like that.
Yeah, very early. But yeah, I think the Pokemon Company is at least a little bit aware that their design style has changed because when they did Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, they came out with this mythical Pokemon called Meltan and Melmetal. They evolve. But they'd said in interviews like, oh yeah, we wanted to make a new mythical Pokemon that matched the aesthetic of Generation 1. And so the designs are very simplified. They're steel type, but they just couldn't help themselves. They put these stupid little red tails on them. And it's just like, they would never have done that. They would have never done that in Generation 1.
Listen, I'm not saying that there's not going to be some like some duds in every generation, you know? There's always going to be that stuff. I heard that like for the starters, they have like a multi-month like design review process to really land them and get them right. And then for other Pokemon, they're just like, you know, give them a week or something. Like, that seems good, ship it off.
But it's like what we've talked about in other episodes where if you think about one thing too much, you end up doing stupid stuff. This goes for hairstylists. This goes for architects. It goes for Pokemon designers. Because the stuff they end up with, the stuff they end up with in the end is whack.
Yeah, there has been some particularly whack starters recently. The most recent ones really got some flack.
Did you see the duck, the newest one?
Yeah, the duck is.
It basically like, what is it? Merengue dances all the time, something like that.
It is funny, like they run out of stuff in the animal kingdom, so now they have to like pull stuff from human culture. I liked, in terms of single evolution things, the bird that's a luchador. I was a big fan of that one. Yeah, that was fun. But yeah, I think people forget the duds in Generation 1, Seal and Dugong.
I liked Dugong a bit.
Yeah, but it's like
the horn.
The horn. For me, it's the horn. For me.
Yeah.
No, yeah, they can't all be winners.
Yeah.
I think most forgettable Pokemon, barring, you know, I mean, there's a lot of forgettable Pokemon now, but I think of the kind of first 4 generations or so, Stantler, the deer type Pokemon from Generation 2, they gave it an evolution recently, so it means that it hasn't been entirely forgotten about, but it just seems like the most like non-Pokemon. Like who is drawn to this? Who looks at this like fat-faced deer and it's just like that? He has a spot in my 6 Pokemon.
Well, it was actually based off of this deer that exists in the real-life Johto region, and it's only available in a small part of the map where it's actually available in real life.
Yeah.
Fun fact. But I would say maybe the most forgettable one is Tangela. It's very underwhelming. But for me personally, it's like Doduo. I don't know why. I just like every time I see it, I'm like, oh, right, there's a 2-headed bird for some reason. Yeah. But on Generation 1 and horns, so prior to the teraleak, there were other leaks that had happened. Like there was a beta version of Pokemon Gold and Silver that was like you could play the demo. It was called like Space World. It was a video game exposition. Fans had known about this for years, that there were these unused Pokemon that people had seen in the 90s or 2000s. And there were all these rumors and sketches, but somehow it eventually leaked online. And a lot of the like unused designs from Gold and Silver are honestly amazing. Like I like the water starters a ton. But there are some good designs out there that I really wish they'd like release, because it's better than what they're doing now.
Yeah, like just sample from when things had a little more consistency.
Yeah. The most famous one is actually, have you heard of Gorochu?
Goruchu. No.
It is the third stage evolution in the Pikachu line.
Whoa.
Yeah, I put a link in the show notes to the back sprite. The front sprite has never been found. But
Gorochu.
Yeah, fans knew about this from an interview that like it was gonna have horns. Turns out it was one horn. Very good one. But I wish they just released this stuff. Yeah.
Oh my god. I don't know that it's so tantalizing when you only have the back sprite. You know, the mind reels to think of what the front sprite could be.
I know there's some good like artist interpretations out there.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and speaking of leaks and stuff, the teraleak itself, I don't spend too much time on this, but before this teraleak, I had heard somewhere, I really tried to find stuff about this for the episode, but I heard that there was a handbook that Pokemon would distribute to third-party merchandising partners to kind of like keep them, to give them some lanes to work with, basically. Yeah. Put some bumpers up on what you can do in the Pokemon world. And it had just some very strong ground rules, like don't talk about like Pokemon eating other Pokemon, or just like, or even what they eat in general. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about like Pokemon breeding too much. Like it pretty like makes sense, baseline rules. But no, I couldn't find anything else about that. But
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that got released that they are not happy about. Like one of the things that made me kind of like, dude, are you serious? Was that the PSD files for like Pokemon official logos came out. Like the assets that are now publicly available are literally like mind blowing.
Yeah.
But yeah, some stuff that it leaked was pretty embarrassing for them, like the lore stories that involved like Pokemon and human intercourse. And then there's some things that got public that they just never really wanted to like be publicly available about, like the legendaries and how they're connected and XYZ.
Yeah, that was weird. A very like schizo kind of graph of like the origin of the Pokemon world and how like this is written around like Generation 4. I think we have like how every legendary is connected. Yeah, to what end is always my question for that. Like you only get 8 hours in the workday. I mean, I know they work longer. Japanese salarymen.
I feel like it made me think of the Evangelion. Actually, you know what this is. Like how in Evangelion they have the like Jewish like complex dogmatic symbolism.
Yeah, that's like some Kabbalah stuff. That's some Jewish mysticism that I'm not too well versed in. We have to ask Madonna. I think she's the only person into Kabbalah that I really can name off the top of my head. I know. But
yeah, there are a bunch of like new Pokemon that got leaked. Okay, I just liked seeing them. I didn't like most of them.
Yeah. I kind of liked reading their business like memos. I liked reading that stuff where like it's just so honest. They talked about like removing Ash from the series and like all the motivations behind that and what their roadmap should be. Yeah. It's just cool to see, I don't know, corporate strategizing. Maybe I'm lame for that. Like I like to imagine the Joseph of, years ago to be more excited for the Pokemon, but I'm just like, yeah, no, how does one? Like you've kind of written yourself into a corner with Ash. Like how do we get out of this? Like what do fans actually want? What do they think they want? I don't know.
I mean, so many people get to have truly creative jobs, like working for the Pokemon company. I mean, think of how many fans there are for each employee. It's such like an asymmetric relationship. And all of the fans, I'm sure, would dream about getting to contribute to the Pokemon franchise in some capacity.
I mean, the sheer amount of just fan content for Pokemon. Who consumes this? Who plays fan games? Who plays Pokemon fan games? Like, I don't know.
And I saw something from the leak this week that was really interesting. Apparently there was like a flying evolution planned, but people at the Pokemon company were like, oh, we can't actually use this because we found fan art that's very similar.
Yeah, I saw that thing. They had to cancel that. They changed the design of that one keychain Pokemon because it looked too much like the Vatican's logo. Like, there's just this insight into the design system. I don't know. It's just like they have to do so much like PR and image control, like just from like internally, I mean,
maybe this is why the designs are whack.
Yeah. Too many like review meetings.
Too many fan designs out there.
Designed by committee as well.
Yeah. So this begs the question. Okay. So how and why did the Pokemon franchise become mediocre? Because I think that unlike a lot of different franchises, Pokemon is not seemingly that willing to tap into its 1990s original aesthetic and go the nostalgia route. Instead, it's develop this second aesthetic that is much more popular. But I think they'd be a lot better off if they did what RuneScape did, which I never played RuneScape, but RuneScape eventually ended up offering 2 games, the official RuneScape and then RuneScape Old School. I feel like Pokemon would do really well if it decided to do this too, where, you know, it had a new game that had all the new flashy features for little children. And then there was just like a simpler game that still involved the like grid system, and it was 2-dimensional, and it had all of the things that OG fans like us would maybe like.
I think they're doing a little bit of that. When they re-released like Brilliant Diamond and Sparkling Pearl, whatever the hell that one's called, they like chibified it basically. So they have the grid, or I think a grid, like overworld and stuff. But then with like Scarlet and Violet, like those are the mainline ones, and those have all the new features. But then with Legends Arceus, they did a little more experimental stuff. So it's like, so you're right, there is a hole. They're not doing like a back to basics one. Instead, they're doing like a, we continue the main line as everyone hates it. And then the Arceus ones is like, we listen to your feedback. Because that one seems to have a little bit more like inventiveness and kind of like a much needed like remedying of kind of the problems.
A breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Which actually, that was the last game I played. It could end up being the last one I ever play if they don't get their act together.
Arceus?
Yeah, Legends of Arceus.
Yeah, that one looks like what I thought Pokemon was going to look like at this point. Like, I remember thinking like, God, what's it going to be like in like 10, 15 years? Full 3D world, like, you know, standing next to your Pokemon, summoning like them, throwing Pokeballs actually. I gotta like cool down off of this like renewed Pokemon kick before I drop $60 on Pokemon Arceus. As an adult man.
The traversal system in Legends of Arceus was really fun. But pretty much all the Pokemon you traversed on were new designs, like regional variants or evolutions. But the one that they did for Ursaring, that along with the Gen 9 starters are what made me like reach my limit. But did you ever see that one, the evolution for Ursaring?
No, it's the bear one. But
it looks almost great, but then it has these really stupid eyebrows that look asymmetrical, and they're supposed to be like mud. And it just like, they just can't commit to making a cool, violent, scary Pokemon. They have to be cute or silly now.
They insist that from the get, they had this rule that was like every Pokemon looks like it should be able to be your friend, even if it's strong and powerful. And I'm like, Gyarados passes that test?
No,
do you guys? Like, you guys don't pass your own test. Like, this is like, it's a very pithy and catchy thing to say, but you don't actually follow through with it.
Yeah, I mean, even the pseudo legendaries now look a little bit soy to me, like the Slug Dragon, the Goo Dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The dragons must be cool. I mean, I think maybe Dragonite is like the lamest looking of all the dragons, but it's in a cute and endearing way. Like it's in a Puff the Magic Dragon.
Yeah, there's something Lindy about Dragonite.
Yeah. Can't put my finger on it. But yeah. So, we mentioned fan games before, but there's another little bit of Pokemon as a company acting in the world. When they're not apologizing for a terabyte of leaked information, they are taking active legal action against Pal World.
Yeah.
Which is like a open world crafting game.
It's described as being Pokemon with guns. It's very different than the original Pokemon games, but the success of Pal World, I think, indicates the appetite for more traditional Pokemon designs and just for the Pokemon company to get its act together. Yeah. Because it was the most played game on Steam when it came out, which I think is a good thing, you know, to put some fire underneath Game Freak and the Pokemon company to get them to get moving, because the designs, I'm not going to play Pal World. It doesn't really appeal to me, but...
You don't like guns? You don't like Eevee having a gun?
No, I don't want to kill my Pokemon and make them work in factories, which are things you can do in the game.
Oh my God. This is why the handbook, this is why like being tight with your IPs. I think I'm actually on the company's side here. I think they should sue those guys into the ground.
Yeah, but the designs of the Pals, which are what the quote unquote Pokemon are called in Pal World, but the Pals, you know, there have been articles that have come out about how similar the designs are to existing Pokemon.
It's
but
close.
I you can't hate them for winning. Those designs are kind of better. Like I do like them.
It's interesting. Like on the whole, I do broadly like when the indie developers eat the lunch of the big developers. You know, I think I've talked about this strangely before on the podcast, but like, you know, Harvest Moon was languishing as a series, and then Stardew Valley came around and gave like fans what they actually wanted and listened to them. But there's something about Pokemon that's going to make that a lot harder, which is a generation of 300 assets at least in order to make it feel like something close to a Pokemon game. Like that's just always going to disqualify a lot of indie games. And you can make that go faster by copying more, like changing less.
Yeah. Because the company behind Palworld, Pocket Pair, they'd released a game prior to Palworld that was called AI Art Imposter, which is like stranger than fiction because they literally released like a plagiarism game before releasing Palworld.
God, it would absolutely kill them to actually have an original thought. Yeah. There's another thing called Temtem, which, oh wow, it's actually for Nintendo
I don't
Switch.
like those designs. They look more like Gen 4 or Gen 5 to me.
I like the cell shading. That goes far with me. I think I like the palettes generally. Yeah. I think that's good. They just seem to pick some interesting colors. But it's just, I don't know.
Isn't it so interesting though when you try to articulate like what you like about childhood media and you just resort to being like, I like it.
Yeah.
I like Blastoise. I like Toy
Yeah. You try and like, develop a vocabulary to talk about this. Like, well, actually the shading and the kind of addition of details around this, it's too much visual clutter. And it's just like, no, I like Blastoise.
Yeah. It's like Gyarados looks strong.
Yeah, he looks cool. Yeah. And I would be his friend, actually. No, They always do talk about like how where did I read this thing about Pokemon designs? They always like want to have a very cool Pokemon and they use like Scyther as the like high watermark for that.
It is cool.
It is just cool. Like it's hard to express, but it's like, I think about that meme where it's like you laugh, but putting the fedora on the egg gives it a certain mystique and allure. Like, I don't know. There's something cool about him.
There is something cool about him. And then briefly, I just want to say a few more things about Pokemon and other media other than the games. So I presume you watched the first few Pokemon movies.
Yeah. As a kid, I remember the first one, which is where the Pokemon's clones beat the shit out of them at the end. And like Pikachu is crying. A lot of people have core memories regarding that. Yeah.
Yeah. The original movie was drastically changed for Western audiences. Mm-hmm. And the original Japanese cut doesn't seem to have ever been publicly released. There was this other plot that was planned that they never came out with. But I found an article from Den of Geek where they said the Pokemon movie's producer, Kubo Masakazu, was concerned about the Japanese film's lack of a distinct villain. The people at Warner also gave us some hassle over the script, Masakazu wrote. According to them, the Japanese original does not distinguish clearly enough between the good guys and the bad. Such a movie would not be successful in a multi-ethnic country like the United States, they insisted, because the viewers would not know who to identify with and who to cheer on. In other words, the heroes and villains needed to be identified clearly. Yeah. Which is why there's that fight scene. Because that's actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that where the song happens and the Pokemon are slapping each other, that was like not something that was really in the Japanese film.
That's so funny. It was just like, it's like, no, we need more clarity. Very like, we need moral clarity.
And the clarity is Pikachu crying.
Yeah. It reminds me of when there was the Hays Code and you had to like have a scene in movies where villains were brought to justice. Like we just crave like, I thought America loves anti-heroes. I think for our kids media, we're like, no, you cannot have an anti-hero. Like, it needs to be clearly defined who's the good
those
guy
Mewtwo soliloquies were beautiful.
Yes.
Why was I created?
That just whole idea of like a genetically modified Pokemon, I don't think that's like a third rail. They don't touch that again. I don't think in the series. Like, yeah, there's like digital Pokemon like Porygon and stuff, but like I think they kind of stray away from the like mutation type.
Genesect and type Null.
Oh, type Null. When I saw that was a Pokemon's name, I'm like, they're going off the rails. They're going. Things are going. I look away for 4 years, and there's a Pokemon called Type Null. Yeah, a colon in its name.
Man, it is wild the number of Pokemon I can think up and just like name drop on this podcast. I didn't realize I had all of this knowledge.
No, this is what makes me like understand. Like, this is why how other guys can memorize rosters of sports teams.
Yeah,
like I just can't do that because I've spent all my like memory slots on Pokemon generations 1 to 5.
That and the names of cities and their metro lines.
Yeah, for you. Yeah, me and different types of wool cloth. It's just what God gives you sometimes.
And then the show. Did you watch the show?
As a kid, yeah. Oh, wait, one last thing on the movies. They're produce an insane clip every year without failing. They're always lined up to release with the Japanese like Ghoul holiday. basically. So kids watch it when they're on vacation with their families. So they never miss a year. They literally haven't since 1999.
Yeah.
And one of the movies is just they remade the first one, but in 3D. They remade like Pokemon the movie. So like we're talking about the nostalgia cash-ins and stuff. It's getting a little too on the nose.
Do you want to hear about something kind of bizarre from the leak that I didn't mention?
Oh.
Okay, so there was a planned movie that got canceled. It was called Project Bauer, otherwise known as Pokemon Movie 24. It was supposed to be set in the Kanto region and feature the original 151 Pokemon, and it was going to address concerns about the initial portrayal of social media negativity and suicidal themes. There was going to be a Pokemon movie sort of catered for adults that talked about suicide. Could you imagine if this came out?
Thank God for the corporate structures to prevent this from happening. Let me tell you, I love the men with their stamps. I love the naysayers. It just sounds like the Puss in Boots having a panic attack type media that I don't really want anymore. Like,
oh right, did that happen in Puss in Boots?
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
I saw
Was
that.
it dramatic?
Yeah. I was just like, I didn't come to the movie theater for this. Antonio Banderas playing a cat having a panic attack.
Yeah.
All right. Oh yeah, but the show, it's like complete mush to watch it in my mind. Like it's just they have like the whole character of the episode kind of thing. Like how do they just do that? Like how do you just generate a new random person who appears and then says goodbye to the team at the end of it?
Yeah.
You know?
There were characters of the week, but I like the show a lot for the non-characters of the week, mainly Team Rocket. Because honestly, as an adult, every time I see a clip on social media of Jesse James or Meowth, it actually still makes me laugh. Like it's an impressingly comedic
setup
show.
For the trio. Yeah. You think James is as gay in the Japanese version?
No, he's not. I've looked into that.
I've researched this intensely. I don't think he's half as gay. Like he's just this little queen prancing around. It's funny because they're given the same animation to work with, you know, but it really it's a testament to the abilities of voice actors, you know.
Yeah, apparently it was like the voice actor's idea. He was like, "Oh, this guy, he has purple hair. Maybe he's gay."
Him and his beard going around.
Yeah.
And then New York, and then Meowth is from like the Bronx or something. Like I don't know, the accent is very funny to me.
Yeah. The original Pokemon series was really interesting. I once read about how one of the people in charge of it, he was trying to make it as bizarre as possible by taking a bunch of drugs while he was writing it.
Is that true? That sounds like something people would make. It sounds like stuff like, oh, Ash actually dies in the first scene of Pokemon and he's just actually in a coma the whole time.
No. He said this publicly.
This is a real thing.
But no, I mean, if you think about some of those early episodes, like the one where there's the Island of Giant Pokemon, did you ever see that one?
No.
And yeah, there's just all these really bizarre things that happen. There's also an episode where there's like a mixture of like a Venusaur and a Blastoise. There's like stuff in the early series that they'd never be able to do now.
I remember like there's a scene where Gary is driving a convertible full of hot women in it. It's like he's 12. Like what is happening? I always thought that was fun.
Yeah. And also Gary, for some reason, he has more than 8 gym badges.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No.
The show got away with so much.
Yeah. No. I just felt like the show would do stuff and then the game developers would be like, come on. Like, we have to work with this. We have to like somehow make these both meet in the middle.
Yeah. And then one other piece of media I want to bring up, plushies, but not really talk about the plushies, but just this one YouTuber I've sort of followed. Well, she hasn't come up in my feed for years, I feel like, but I found this girl who just gets really excited about Pokemon plushies, and basically there are plushie hauls where she'll be like, oh yeah, I just bought this life-size Vaporeon plushie, and here's the Pokemon Sitting Cuties Eevee versus the other Eevee from this other line.
Oh my God.
And she always introduces her videos with this kind of cringe intro, but it makes me think about like how sad fandom kind of is, because this leads into the next section. Because I don't know, the video games, plushie enthusiasts, shiny hunters, like I just feel like there's something wrong when people get this into something, because they're not,
it's hijacking a part of their brain.
They deny themselves the ability to think critically about it. Like they have to like everything. They have to like everything that comes out. You know, the only time I've ever seen the Pokemon community criticize the Pokemon Company or Game Freak was actually with Dexit, when they announced that some of the Pokemon won't be in games, and everyone flipped out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they were just going to eat everything.
Eat the slop.
They're going to eat the slop, everything that came their way without ever telling the Pokemon company they could do better.
Yeah, no, it's just, I don't know. I can't imagine being a fan like that of something, like being that, like, I don't know, giving that much power to a corporation that like their next release of media like could have a serious effect on my mood or something. Like, I just can't give that to them. You know?
I mean, have you ever seen the anecdotes or screenshots of like Marvel fans? Like one time I read one where they were talking about some like, or maybe like the 50th Marvel film to come out, but they were saying something like, oh, you know, like, yeah, it's not my favorite. It's like eating candy. It's not my favorite candy, but I'm still eating candy nonetheless. And I don't know. It just, what's your take on fandom just in general? Like,
I just don't like fan culture. It's a consumer hobby. I mean, I have some consumer hobbies, going to restaurants and stuff like that. I'm cautious of it. But it's just so like brazen. I don't know. I think people used to have more shame about it. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, it feels like kicking people when they're down. You make fun of someone for having Funko Pops and stuff. Are those fully out? I think that like the backlash has become so strong. Is anyone still collecting Funko Pops?
I have a cousin who's into them who I don't feel like has posted them in a while. So maybe.
Yeah. I think that just, they got too much flack.
Yeah.
No.
But I mean, you know, I don't usually think about them. I'm busy having an adult life, doing adult things. But I mean, thinking about them for this week, I just feel a bit sad for them. Like, I wish they weren't wasting thousands of hours trying to chase the same highs they got when they were a kid.
What else were they going to do? I always think that about people who get like, I'd say like tripped up or get caught in these kind of feedback loops of essentially addiction to certain forms of media. And it's like, I don't think they'd be solving cancer otherwise. I don't know what else their thing would be. I don't know. Like, not that everyone should be generating amazing. Yeah, maybe it's protecting them from that. Yeah. I don't know. I think I developed that theory over recording this episode that like, you know what? Maybe it's saving people from gambling addiction. Maybe a shiny hunter out there is like, that's one shiny hunter, but it's saving the world from one degenerate gambler. So keep on hunting those shinies.
Yeah. This was fun.
Yeah.
I'm surprised by how much we both knew.
Yeah. We were really like, I don't know, it just felt like I was like pulling things out of my like deep buried memory. Like, I just think that if I'm like dying of dementia at 85, I could still probably list 50 Pokemon. Yeah. Which is crazy.
Yeah. This could end up being our only video game episode, although I've thought about maybe doing Death Stranding 2 when it comes out.
Yeah, that could be something.
We'll see. I don't know if you want to drop $70 on that.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'll just play it at your place. But no, I like the idea of ending this with some like, there's like, I found myself falling into like some YouTube holes with this, but there's something just so fun about Pokemon trivia. Yeah. I don't know what, it's like learning that little thing about like a weird development quirk and stuff. Snorlax is based on a real person. Yeah, just a guy who would eat a lot and sleep in the office and was fat. But he loved it. He put it on his business card. Like everyone, like as you said, like they'd have Pokemon on the business cards and stuff. You could choose which one you had. And so he'd always put Snorlax on his. Like, come on, that's so cute. And then got to the bottom, Farfetch'd, an oft-forgotten Pokemon from Generation 1.
That one is forgettable too.
Yeah, but it's like, I love the parts that can't be like fully culturally translated. It's basically, it comes from a turn of phrase. It's just like, a duck comes bearing spring onions. It's like something it's a golden opportunity or something that's too good to be true, basically, because green onions go so well with duck, I guess. So why would one like just be walking around with it like ready to be cooked? But it's just like, how do you? It's funny to think that a Japanese kid and an American kid would have such a different read of that. A Japanese kid would be like, oh, haha. It would be like if a Pokemon was a flying pig. You know, like, oh, I get that. That's a cultural phrase we use all the time. And then for an American kid, it's just like, this is just a bird holding an onion? Like, what's going on?
You know, it's like a Jewish / Old Testament reference that's kind of funny. Do you know Spoink from Gen 3?
Oh, yeah, Pearls Before Swine. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's one that wouldn't have been very easily interpreted by Japanese audiences.
Yeah, but us Westerners, us Abrahamic faith people can get that bit. Yeah, no, that is like a fun biblical reference.
Yeah. There are a lot of fun trivia bits. I'll contribute one to the end of the episode. Mine is, have you ever heard Victory Bell scream?
Yeah, it's really messed up and it's consistent. So it's not just I thought it was just one random episode of Pokemon where it's just like a blood curdling
I think Jesse
scream.
had one and was constantly getting eaten by it. So Jesse would like go in the victory bell and he'd be screaming, and then the victory bell would be screaming.
It's just blood curdling. It's so good.
I'll put that in the show notes. But people, we didn't play any sounds this episode.
You've been having trouble with that.
Yeah, Pokemon is very serious about copyright infringement.
Oh yeah, so no, they'll come right.
I don't even know what we're gonna do for the episode artwork. We'll have to figure that out.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah,
maybe if we give it a hat or a mustache, then it's different.
I don't know. Probably an AI generated Pokemon could work. I don't really like trying to figure out how to get AI programs to work. It feels like even nerdier than Pokemon.
I was looking up Ken Sugimori watercolor art, and there was a horrifying AI image generated that was just like just a square, and it was just full to the brim with like Pokemon limbs, like watercolor Pokemon limbs. They weren't severed in any way, but it was just like complete like visual like garbage generated by an AI. It looked like if a whole bunch of Latioses and Latiases were like chopped up in a blender and put onto a screen. Like AI doesn't know how to deal with Pokemon.
But you're not recommending that for the episode artwork?
No, we won't do that one. No,
okay.
We'll make something a little bit better.
Cool. Well, our audience will have to see what we come up with. Thank you guys for listening.
Have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye.